is weakened, but arguably more hardline with the IRGC in full control. Can you weigh in on that? Because the concern that this reporting raises is that if this regime remains intact, it could be emboldened.
Well, look, I think it's one piece of information, and it's also a snapshot in time. Even if we accept that that's accurate, this operation, as I said, it's achieving these extraordinary tactical and operational successes. And I think the president's going to have significant opportunity over the coming days and if necessary, weeks to change that trajectory. And again, this is not static. This is moving constantly. And the Iranians are adapting to the facts on the ground. Your reporter just noted another Israeli and American success over the last couple of hours in going after regime targets. I think that may be a moment in time, but the trajectory we're on, I would still stipulate, is an Iran that is a much less significant threat to the United States and the region than the one that we had 16 days ago.
Yeah, and finally, bringing this back here at home, national security officials are set to testify before the Senate Intel Committee today on the global threats to the United States that we are facing right now. Of course, we're talking about sleeper cells, lone wolf targets. Your concern when it comes to that?
The director of the United States National Counterterrorism Center, Joe Kent, resigned his position on Tuesday in direct protest of the ongoing war. In a formal letter to the president, Kent stated that Iran posed no imminent threat to the nation and asserted that the war was initiated due to pressure from external interests. This resignation of a senior intelligence official marks the first major internal fracture within the administration regarding the legal and strategic basis for the current offensive. At the same time, the administration continues to claim that international allies are failing their treaty obligations by refusing to join a conflict that your own intelligence experts now admit has no basis in national defense. Let's play this clip.
Let's turn it over to Chief Foreign Correspondent Trey Inks, live on the ground in Tel Aviv at the site of an Iranian missile strike. Trey.
Yeah, guys, I do want to start with some breaking news here. A senior Israeli official telling Fox News that Ismail Khatib, the intelligence minister of Iran, was targeted in a precision strike overnight. Khatib was responsible for supporting Iran's global network of infiltrators, of sleeper cells, to threaten countries like the United States and others around the world. This comes as we are tracking developments out of Israel, where overnight the Iranians launched more cluster munitions at the civilian population. Here, at least 2 people were killed in Ramat Gan, just on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. And another military official telling Fox News overnight it will take a few more weeks for the ballistic missile threat to be neutralized. You can see in some of the video here the aftermath of those cluster munition impacts overnight. These bomblets, dozens of them raining down on the population below. The Israelis not just looking to the incoming fire from the east, but also looking north to the Lebanese capital of Beirut in the southern Dakhla neighborhood, a Hezbollah stronghold where the Israelis launched a new series of airstrikes overnight and into this morning, taking down at least one high-rise building. The strikes that are continuing in Lebanon are also continuing in Iran, where yesterday the besieged forces came under attack by the Israeli Air Force. They are systematically going after this wing of the IRGC to ensure that they are not able to crack down at the level that they did previously on protesters. And as all of this is taking place, just right now as we're speaking, there are some alerts coming in. This means that in about, you can hear the buzzing noise here.
The claim that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is irrelevant or that its members are violating their oaths by refusing to participate in the offensive against Iran is a lie. On the social media platform Truth Social, Donald Trump characterized NATO allies as non-responsive and suggested that the United States should finish off the Iranian state and leave the responsibility of the Strait of Hormuz to those allies. Former Chief of Staff Alex Gray reinforced this position by stating that Donald Trump is the only reason NATO exists and that the alliance has no future if members do not support American operations that serve their interests. These assertions rely on the premise that NATO is an offensive tool for American foreign policy rather than a defensive alliance. Let's play this clip.
Here from the phones, this means in about 10 minutes, there will be new incoming Iranian ballistic missile fire against Israel. The population here likely heading into shelters at this moment. Todd, Carly?
Despite those signals that we're just hearing and the fact that you're probably going to have to go to a bomb shelter once again, how would you describe the pace with which these cluster munitions are coming into Israel, as the launchers, of course, have been a major target for Israel in the United States?
Yeah, there are certainly fewer missiles, but when they have these cluster munitions on top, they are not precise. And so they rain these bomblets and small munitions down on the population below. And we just saw a location where 2 people were killed just on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. I'm going to toss it back to you. We need to go take some cover amid this incoming missile fire, but we will keep you posted throughout the morning on Fox and Friends.
Understood. Trey Yang's live for us. Stay safe. Trey, thank you so much. Let's bring in former NSC Chief of Staff under President Trump, Alex Gray. Alex, thank you so much.
The exact claim being scrutinized is that NATO allies are failing to honor the oaths they signed by not assisting in the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and the strikes on Iranian infrastructure. Alex Gray stated that NATO would be totally irrelevant today without Donald Trump, and that the president is right to be infuriated by the lack of support from allies. This framing suggests a legal obligation for NATO members to support a war of choice. This is a fundamental misrepresentation of the North Atlantic Treaty and the current security environment. Forensic evidence from official testimony and field reports proves that the current war is not a defensive action against an imminent nuclear or conventional threat. National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard testified before the Senate that Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated in June 2025 during Operation Midnight Hammer. Gabbard explicitly stated that there have been no efforts since then to rebuild that capability. This testimony directly contradicts any claim that the current campaign is a preemptive strike to prevent nuclearization. Furthermore, Joe Kent's resignation letter confirms that Iran posed no imminent threat to the United States before the commencement of hostilities on February 28. The evidence proves that the United States and Israel are engaged in a decapitation strategy aimed at the systematic elimination of the Iranian state's command structure. Since the start of the campaign, at least 2,000 people have been killed. The evidence also shows that the United States is using advanced artificial intelligence, specifically Palantir AI, to bomb thousands of targets in Iran, accelerating the kill chain beyond traditional human oversight. Let's play this clip.
For joining us. Going back to the NATO element of all of this, and Senator Lindsey Graham posted on X yesterday saying that he has never seen President Trump so angry than when the president realized how little help NATO was willing to give us to secure the Strait of Hormuz. And he described it as arrogance. Others have called it weakness. How should we view this denial from our NATO allies?
Well, Carly, Donald Trump is the only reason NATO still exists in any form at all. If he hadn't used the skillful diplomacy that he used in his first term, NATO would be totally irrelevant today. He got them to finally spend something approaching a decent amount on their own defense. But the reality is, if NATO is not going to be there for us when we need them, if the most powerful military that keeps NATO relevant at all can't count on the alliance members to be there for us when we're doing an operation that actually serves their interests as much or more as it serves ours, when you think about it strategically, the alliance has no future. And I never thought I would say that. I've always been a strong supporter of the alliance, but I think the president is absolutely right to be infuriated by the lack of support we're getting from our allies.
And according to
The analysis of power and control reveals a strategy of military coercion intended to force international compliance. The strike on the South Pars gas field, the world's largest natural gas field, was coordinated with and approved by the Trump administration. This strike disabled most of Iran's gas production and halted the flow of gas to Iraq. By targeting the heart of Iran's energy infrastructure, the administration is intentionally triggering global price shocks, with oil climbing toward $110 a barrel. The control mechanism is clear. The administration is using the threat of global economic instability and the continued blockade of the Strait of Hormuz to pressure allies into participating in the conflict. Trump's own words confirm this intent, stating that leaving the strait to allies would get them in gear fast. This is an attempt to use the disruption of 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas supply as leverage against sovereign allies. Let's play this clip.
the Institute for the Study of War, Alex, Iran recognizes that they can't beat the United States and Israel militarily, so their strategy is to outlast. And one of the ways that they plan on doing that is making the economic pain threshold so high, which is why we're all focusing on the Strait of Hormuz. And there is reporting that overnight, those bunker buster bombs were used again in the region of the Strait of Hormuz. So assess for us militarily if we're gaining control of the region or where you think things stand right now.
Well, I think militarily, operationally, there is no question that this has been one of the most successful operations in the history of the United States military. I mean, there is no question that we are achieving objective after objective. You just look at the metrics the president set from day one, and you cross-reference that with what's actually happened on the ground. The proxies, the missiles, the Iranian Navy, the drone program, leadership targets, every single metric of operational success has not just been hit, I would argue it's been exceeded. And so to hear the debate in the American media and among some corners of my friends, fellow members of the MAGA movement, it just shocks me that you see people saying that this operation has not been a success when the facts just totally belie that, Carly.
Well, Alex, I'm glad that you said that, because I was reading this morning this Washington Post report, and it says that despite 2 weeks of relentless airstrikes, U.S. intelligence assessments say that the Iranian regime will likely remain in place for now. It goes on to say that the regime
The strongest defense argument for this policy is the claim that NATO members must share the burden of regional security and that the operation in Iran serves their interests more than it serves the United States. Alex Gray argues that if the most powerful military cannot count on alliance members during an operation that serves their interests, the alliance is effectively dead. This argument is dismantled by the legal reality that NATO is a defensive, not offensive, alliance. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Foreign Minister Johann Vadapul have explicitly stated that a military solution is not the only realistic solution and that NATO's charter does not extend to offensive campaigns in the Persian Gulf. French President Emmanuel Macron has also noted that France is not a party to the conflict, did not initiate the war, and will only consider escorting ships after the war ends, and in coordination with Iran. The defense's argument fails because it attempts to redefine a defensive treaty as an obligatory offensive pact. Legal education in plain English requires an understanding of the difference between a defensive alliance and a collective offensive. The North Atlantic Treaty is predicated on Article 5, which states that an attack against one member is an attack against all. However, this is triggered only by an armed attack on a member's territory or forces. It does not grant the United States the legal authority to demand that allies join an offensive war of decapitation against a state that posed no imminent threat. International law also distinguishes between the right to self-defense and acts of aggression. When the director of the National Counterterrorism Center states on the record that there was no imminent threat, the legal justification for the war under the United Nations Charter and the NATO Treaty vanishes. The professional judgment on the responsibility and fitness of the current leadership is based on their disregard for intelligence assessments and treaty limitations. The decision to pursue a decapitation strategy that has killed the supreme leader, the intelligence minister, and the security chief within 3 weeks indicates a total shift toward regime change through violence. Expert analysts like Sanam Vakil of Chatham House have noted that this approach does not produce democracy, but instead breeds hardened resistance. John B. Alterman of the Center for Strategic and International Studies has called the attempt to decapitate a state unprecedented and ill-conceived. By ignoring the warnings of their own counterterrorism director and pursuing a strategy that even allies call blackmail, the administration is demonstrating a lack of fitness for the responsible management of international security and global energy markets. The expert authority stack confirms the illegitimacy and risks of the current path. Joe Kent, a longtime supporter of the president and director of the National Counterterrorism Center, has resigned because he believes the war is based on false pretenses. Tulsi Gabbard, the National Intelligence Director, has confirmed that the stated nuclear threat does not exist. European Union foreign ministers, including those from Luxembourg and Germany, have condemned the administration's approach as a dangerous escalation. These are not partisan critics. These are the administration's own intelligence heads and the leaders of the world's most significant security and economic blocs. Institutional accountability rests with the United States Senate and the courts. The Senate Intelligence Committee is expected to receive testimony from top intelligence officials regarding the lack of an imminent threat before the February 28 invasion. There is a clear failure of institutional enforcement when an administration can initiate a full-scale war and target global energy infrastructure without a clear legal mandate or an actual threat to the homeland. The resignation of Joe Kent provides a primary evidentiary basis for a congressional investigation into the origins of the war and the influence of external lobbies on American military decisions. The procedural consequences of these actions are immediate and severe. Iran has responded to the strike on the South Pars field by threatening to target energy infrastructure in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates within hours. Iran has already launched at least 2,000 weapons at the UAE and continues to fire ballistic missiles at Israel, resulting in civilian fatalities in Ramat Gan. In Lebanon, the IDF has destroyed critical civilian infrastructure, including bridges over the Litani River, and conducted intense airstrikes in central Beirut. These are the procedural results of a strategy that prioritizes the assassination of leaders over diplomatic or defensive stability. The conflict has entered a state of attrition, with no clear end in sight, and the total collapse of Iran's command structure, potentially leading to an ungovernable and more violent regional vacuum. The command structure of the Islamic Republic of Iran has been effectively dismantled through a series of precision strikes. On February 28th, the opening day of the war, a joint U.S.-Israeli strike on the leadership house in Tehran killed Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, his daughter, his son-in-law, and his grandson. In the same wave, 12 other senior officials were killed, including IRGC Commander Mohammad Pakpour, Defense Minister Aziz Nasserzadeh, and Armed Forces Chief Abdul Rahim Mousavi. The systematic nature of these killings continued into March. When Majid Ebni Reza was appointed as the replacement defense minister, he was killed just 24 hours later. On March 17th, Ali Larijani, the head of the Supreme National Security Council and Iran's de facto wartime leader, was killed in a safe house strike alongside his son, Morteza. On March 18th, Intelligence Minister Esmail Khatib was eliminated in an overnight strike on Tehran. These are the facts of the decapitation strategy. This strategy has not resulted in the collapse of the Iranian military's ability to conduct attacks. Over the past 24 hours, Iran has conducted 11 waves of ballistic missile attacks against Israel, focusing on the Tel Aviv area. Hezbollah has conducted 43 attack waves against Israel using rockets, missiles, and UAVs. In the UAE, more than 2,000 weapons have been launched from Iran since the start of the conflict. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad has been targeted and is reportedly on fire. Despite the elimination of their top leaders, the Iranian military and its proxies maintain a sustained rate of attacks characterized as a war of attrition. The economic consequences are equally documented. The strike on the Asaluye gas facilities in the Bushehr area, conducted in coordination with the United States, has disabled the majority of Iran's gas production. This has halted gas flow to Iraq and led to Iranian threats against the energy infrastructure of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The South Pars field, which holds 70% of Iran's domestic supply and a vast portion of Qatar's exports, is now a combat zone. Global oil prices have climbed to $110 a barrel as the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz continues. While the administration claims these strikes are successful because they exceed military metrics, the institutional reality is one of increasing isolation. The German chancellor has emphasized that NATO is a defensive alliance. EU foreign ministers have noted a total lack of willingness to take action that could lead to direct confrontation with Iranian forces. The French president has stated France was not a party to the initiation of this war. The administration's own counterterrorism director has resigned, stating the war was not based on an imminent threat to the nation. The legal and professional judgment remains. The administration is conducting an offensive war of choice while falsely claiming that allies are violating defensive treaties. The evidence from the Director of National Intelligence and the resigned Director of the National Counterterrorism Center proves that the stated justifications for the war, a nuclear threat, and an imminent conventional threat, are non-existent. The result is a regional war of attrition, rising global energy costs, and a collapse of the international alliance structure. It is necessary to examine the specific role of the intelligence minister, Esmail Khatib, who was killed on March 18th. Khatib was a hardline cleric who had been in his role since 2021. He was considered a trusted figure close to the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. His ministry was responsible for domestic repression and supporting global networks of sleeper cells. The Israeli military described his organization as the primary intelligence body of the regime. His death, along with that of Ali Larijani and Gholamreza Soleimani, means that three of the most senior figures in the Iranian state were eliminated within a 48-hour window. The Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, has announced that the military now has standing authorization to eliminate any senior Iranian official in their sights without case-by-case approval. This marks a shift from targeted strikes to a general policy of assassination against the leadership of a sovereign state. Experts warn that this strategy may be counterproductive. Sanam Vakil notes that the Iranian regime is not a personalized system but has institutional layers that will simply promote from within, potentially bringing up even more radical and untested individuals. Stephen Simon of Dartmouth College suggests that the most likely outcome is not a collapse of the regime, but an Iranian persistence that is wounded and ungovernable. The humanitarian cost is also escalating. In Lebanon, the Ministry of Health reports that at least 968 people, including 116 children, have been killed in the last 16 days of fighting. In Iran, the Ministry of Health reports at least 1,144 people killed and nearly 19,000 injured since the war began on February 28. In Israel, 15 civilians have been killed and over 3,600 injured. These casualties are the direct result of the escalation to full-scale war. The administration's focus on NATO burden sharing in this context is a distraction from the legal and intelligence failures that led to the conflict. When the president suggests that he will leave the security of the Strait of Hormuz to non-responsive allies, he is threatening to abandon a vital global shipping lane to force those allies to support an offensive war they did not agree to and which their own laws may prohibit them from joining. This is the use of global economic stability as a bargaining chip in a decapitation campaign that his own experts say is based on a lie. The procedural path forward involves the scheduled hearings before the Senate Intelligence Committee. These hearings must address the discrepancy between the administration's rhetoric and the testimony of officials like Tulsi Gabbard and the resignation of Joe Kent. The question of whether the United States is violating international law by pursuing a war of aggression without an imminent threat must be answered by the institutions of accountability. The current strategy is an unprecedented attempt to decapitate a state through a limited military effort. As John Alterman notes, the track record for such ambitious political goals through limited military means is poor. The administration has systematically removed the individuals who might have the credibility or influence to negotiate an end to the conflict, leaving no one with the authority to stop the violence. This is not a strategy for victory, it is a strategy for permanent instability. The evidence is clear. The claim that NATO allies are failing their duties is false. The war is not based on an imminent threat. The nuclear program was already destroyed. The administration is using military force and economic blackmail to coerce international support for a war of choice. This is the prosecutorial record of the Second Iran War as of March 18, 2026. I encourage you to review the official testimony of National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard and the resignation letter of Joe Kent to verify the facts regarding the lack of an imminent threat. Subscribe to this channel for further evidence-based analysis of the conflict.